Hi friends. So first a little bit of clarification on this week's agenda. There's no new lectures, no new assignments, no new work for you to do. I just want to give you some time to catch up on whatever it is that was unfinished or any work that you hadn't finished yet. So if you've been proactive over the semester, hooray! Now you've got a lot of space to catch up on whatever else you have going on in your life. And if you haven't, that's what this little chunk is going to be for. I assume that most of you in the end of this semester have omnidirectional craziness. I'm sure it's everywhere. So I'm trying to create as much space so that each one of you can adjust to whatever it is that you need to do. So that's just clarity. That's what's going on. Before we part, however, since this will probably be the last face-to-face-ish communication that we're going to have, I just kind of wanted to take a second and kind of address, try to put some closure on this weird experience that we've shared. So I take my role as a teacher very seriously, and I especially take being a teacher in very strange times as a serious responsibility. So I just wanted to take a minute to try to put, hopefully, a helpful little cherry on top of this weird thing that we've been through. So as we navigate through this, whatever it is, I think back to my education when I was an undergraduate, and I was really, really lucky. I had some incredible professors. So I mean, many of them, but particularly I'm thinking of Paul Woodruff, Robert Solomon, and Edwin Allaire. All were professors at the University of Texas when I was going there. Actually, that reminds me, although you don't have anything you have to do this week, I have left a film on the course shell for you to watch. I'm sure you've watched your fill of movies over the last couple of weeks, but if you need something to do or you want to be one last little bit of philosophical stimulation before we part, there's a movie called Waking Life that I've put on the course shell for us. And if you pay close attention, you might notice some of my old professors in that movie. It was filmed in Austin in the early part of the 21st century, the early 2000s. And there's a scene with Robert Solomon. I'm literally in that classroom when he's talking. So this film's always been like a part of my personal mythology. I like it a lot. It's very philosophically engaging. So I just put that on there for one last little piece of mind candy for you. But when I was going to the University of Texas, I was actually in Paul Woodruff's classroom during 9/11, like literally. Like we went in to the classroom, had a nice little talk about Aristotle, and then I come outside and it's like, I leave you people alone for 1 hour. What the? So it was really intense. And the next class, Professor Woodruff, he addressed, or he tried his best to address what it means to teach in strange times. And he shared with us his experience as a young man going to Vietnam when he was in his late teens, early 20s. And he talked about the surrealism of sitting in a muddy ditch in some part of some country that he never even heard of before he got sent over there, and watching enemy fire going over his head at night, and watching the tracer bullets fly over his head, and having this kind of profound experience of a balance between terror and beauty. Of like he thought that the bullets going over his head were terrifying, but also in a weird way very beautiful because they were very real. Like his life, he was overwhelmed by the potency of the human condition. It's not as if we are sitting in a muddy ditch having people shoot at us. It's not quite that bad right now. But I imagine that some of you are trying to figure out a way to navigate sorrow and fear in ways that you've never had to deal with before. So this is actually one of the reasons why I do what I do. I think it's critically important, especially in times like this, that people learn how to think about their thinking. One of the things I really appreciate about Paul Woodruff is he was one of the first people to actually take me seriously. I was a very strange young man. People were kind of prone to dismissing me, or I was used to being dismissed. I was used to not being taken seriously. And Paul Woodruff was one of the first adults to really listen to me, to really pay attention to me, to really give my ideas credit. He was often very rough, too. He often was very critical of my ideas, but I realized that in being critical of my ideas, he was taking them seriously. He was trying to push me further into my own mind so that I could be a better thinker. And I'm largely indebted to him for learning to be a better thinker. And while I'm not anywhere near what he is, I hope you understand that in our engagements, whenever I pushed your ideas, whenever I criticized or challenged or confronted or whatever, please know that what I was doing is I was trying to get you to think harder, to think your own thoughts, but with greater precision, because that's the most human thing you can do, is to think and control your own mind. So sorrow and fear are, they're strangely seductive. They're kind of wonderful. They're kind of beautiful. I'm not endorsing them. I'm not saying go be afraid, go be sad. But when you're sad and when you are afraid, there's a certain reality to that. Like you're being honest. Like like quite often there are good reasons to be afraid. Quite often there are good reasons to be sad. And I think a lot of people push that away from themselves. And in pushing that away from themselves, they're missing a part of their own authentic experience. One of the other things about sorrow and fear, though, is that sometimes they can get really, really big, especially at times like this. I kind of have a tendency to anthropomorphize my feelings, like I imagine them as characters in my mind. And whenever sorrow and fear get too big, I just kind of imagine sitting down with them, like I'm in an old Western or something like that. And I just look them right in the face. And I'd say, this brain ain't big enough for the two of us. And I just sit and look at them and think to myself, well, it's you or me. Which one's it gonna be? That is to say, look your sorrow right in the face. Look your fear right in the face. And wait to see which one flinches first. You or your fear? You or your sorrow? In my experience, 100% of the time, sorrow and fear always flinch first. That is to say that when I confront my sorrow, when I confront my fear, I always win. Because I know that they're my sorrow, my fear. Well, that sounds like a bunch of macho BS though, right? Another way of saying this would be, it's okay to have sadness, to have sorrow. It's okay to have fear. But never forget, you have them. They don't have you. Okay, one last thing before we part. Normally I build up some kind of big so what speech for my last lecture, but we really don't have the time or the space or the platform for that. So instead I'm going to include my favorite commencement speech by David Foster Wallace. It was an honor to work with all of you. It was an honor to share this surreal moment with all of you. I know I will remember it for the rest of my life. And I hope that as you proceed forward, in some small way I've been able to provide you with some tools to have greater ownership of your own mind.
There are these two young fish swimming along. and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. There happen to be whole, large parts of adult American life that nobody talks about in commencement speeches. One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I'm talking about. By way of example, let's say it's an average adult day, and you get up in the morning, go to your challenging white-collar college graduate job, and you work hard for 8 or 10 hours, and at the end of the day you're tired and somewhat stressed, and all you want is to go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for an hour and then hit the sack early, because of course you have to get up the next day and do it all again. But then you remember there's no food at home. You haven't had time to shop this week because of your challenging job. And so now, after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of a work day, and the traffic is apt to be very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded, because of course it's the time of day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. But you can't just get in and quickly out. You have to wander all over the huge, overlit store's confusing aisles to find the stuff you want. And you have to maneuver your junky cart through all these other tired, hurried people with carts, etc., cutting stuff out because it's a long ceremony. And eventually, you get all your supper supplies, except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush. So the checkout line is incredibly long, which is stupid and infuriating, but you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who is overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here at a prestigious college. But anyway, you finally get to the checkout line's front, and you pay for your food, and get told to have a nice day in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. And then you have to take your creepy, flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with the one crazy wheel that pulls maddeningly to the left, all the way out through the crowded, bumpy, littery parking lot, and then you have to drive all the way home through slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, etc. Everyone here has done this, of course, but it hasn't yet been part of you graduates' actual life routine, day after week, after month, after year. But it will be. And many more dreary, annoying, seemingly meaningless routines besides. But that is not the point. The point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. About my hungriness and my fatigue and my desire to just get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. And who are all these people in my way? And look at how repulsive most of them are, and how stupid and cow-like and dead-eyed and non-human they seem in the checkout line. Or at how annoying and rude it is that people are talking loudly on cell phones in the middle of the line. And look at how deeply, personally unfair this is. If I choose to think this way in the store and on the freeway, fine. Lots of us do. Except thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. It's the automatic way that I experience the boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the automatic, unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities. The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, all these vehicles stuck and idling in my way, it's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have been in horrible auto accidents in the past, and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get a huge, heavy SUV so they can feel safe enough to drive. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am, and that some of these people probably have much harder, more tedious or painful lives than I do. Again, please don't think I'm giving you moral advice, or that I'm saying you're supposed to think this way, or that anyone expects you to just automatically do it, because it's hard. It takes will and effort, and if you are like me, some days you won't be able to do it, or you just flat out won't want to. But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently at this fat, dead-eyed, over-made-up lady who just screamed at her kid in the checkout line. Maybe she's not usually like this. Maybe she's been up 3 straight nights holding the hand of her husband who's dying of bone cancer. Or maybe this very lady is the low-wage clerk at the motor vehicles department who just yesterday helped your spouse resolve a horrific, infuriating red tape problem through some small act of bureaucratic kindness. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends what you want to consider. If you're automatically sure that you know what reality is and who and what is really important, if you want to operate on your default setting, then you, like me, probably won't consider possibilities that aren't annoying and miserable. But if you've really learned how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell-type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that lit the stars. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things deep down. Not that that mystical stuff's necessarily true. The only thing that's capital T true is that you get to decide how you're going to try to see it. This, I submit, is the freedom of real education, of learning how to be well-adjusted. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. I know that this stuff probably doesn't sound fun and breezy or grandly inspirational the way a commencement speech is supposed to sound. What it is, as far as I can see, is the capital T truth with a whole lot of rhetorical niceties stripped away. You are, of course, free to think of it whatever you wish. But please don't just dismiss it as some finger-wagging Dr. Laura sermon. None of this stuff is really about morality or religion or dogma or big fancy questions of life after death. The capital T truth is about life before death. It is about the real value of a real education, which has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with simple awareness. Awareness of what is so real and essential, so hidden in plain sight all around us all the time, that we have to keep reminding ourselves over and over, this is water. This is water.